today we're examining a culturally appropriate veg and diversity in horticulture, which is a really important concept and question. And we're looking at it from 3 different angles today. Although all of the speakers are London-based at the moment, as it happens, which is a bit of a random coincidence. But we have, to start with, we have Pauline Shakespeare from the Ubelli initiative, and she's a coordinator for the Roots into Food Growing project. Some of you may have caught the earlier session that Pauline was presenting some findings from a really insightful paper from last year. And she's promoting food justice by identifying and training a new generation of BPOC growers who are empowered to develop their own food growing systems and enterprises. So thank you, Pauline, for being here. We've got Elki, a chef and researcher with aspirations to set up the UK's first edible cacti farm. And he's live from, actually, well, everybody's live, but I feel like he's live from his growing space at Wolves Lane Horticultural Centre. I should mention Wolves Lane Horticultural Centre. I've been to visit, and it's a really inspiring centre. If you haven't heard of it, or if you're based in London, I do really recommend you pay a visit. And Pauline is also based there some of the time. So Elki is aiming to set up a cacti farm, 100% organic, sustainable, with no use of electricity and fuels, and a strong link with the local community. And I think he's suffering slightly today from the no electricity or fuels in particular, because we saw -3 or something overnight, at least here elsewhere. And then we're moving on to David Mwanaka of Mwanaka Fresh Farm Foods. Thank you for being here today, David, who has successfully brought white maize to the UK market after years of experimentation, which I believe started in your backyard. And now growing on over 20 acres of land near London, and supplies to the likes of Sainsbury's, Harrods and Selfridges. So a bit of a journey we'll be taking you on through from different lenses, and finally ending with a bit of Q&A and discussion at the end. Just to mention also that Innovative Farmers is looking for interested growers or researchers, coordinators to get involved in a field lab looking at this very topic of culturally appropriate veg. And we'll be posting some links either to the Innovative Farmers website or the Hoover discussion board that we've started, which is already quite lively. Great, so I'd like to hand over now to Pauline for that first presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks everyone for coming today and joining us for this session. I thought I'd start by kind of going through my definition of culturally appropriate veg food, which is broader than just the items, produce that pops out at the end, but considering all of the cultural storytelling, sharing, connecting, and techniques and methods and knowledge that is passed down through culturally appropriate food. It's not just food. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you a video. This is from Black Rootz, which is a Black-led growing collective based at Wolves Lane. And it just gives you a flavour of some of the activities that they've done. And let me just get that up for you now. So what I'll do for those who haven't actually seen the Roots into Food Growing report is just give a basic kind of canter through, and then I'll go back to talking a bit more about culturally appropriate veg. So Roots into Food Growing is a pan-London project funded by Farming the Future, and involves 4 partners, one of which is Ubelli, which is a Black-led infrastructure organisation. One of which is Black Rootz in the video. They're based at Wolves Lane Horticulture Centre, which is in Tottenham in North London. and are a food growing collective that are being incubated by Ubele on site. Another is Organically, which is well-established London-based food growing co-op, been around for 20 years. And the other partner is Lion Land in Our Names, who are running the Justice Room for this event and for the conference. So as Hugh mentioned earlier, the objectives of the project are to identify and train a new generation of Black and minoritized growers, with a particular focus on looking at, I guess, culturally appropriate methods and ways of working with the land, which connect to our topic today. So not just the traditional routes, RHS, Ian Guilds, etc., but looking how to integrate that learning of other food systems that have been passed down, really important to keep alive, really important to preserve, and also have people of colour in leadership positions running their own food growing enterprises. So just going into some of the background, I think most of you are aware there is a lack of BPOC representation in the food growing community in the UK. Policy Exchange in 2017 sort of stumbled across the fascinating fact that agriculture is the least diverse sector in the UK, with 1.4% of farmers being non-white. Alongside that, and something that has very much been a focus during the pandemic, it has been the access of people of colour to outside space and actually being with the land, being able to take on parcels of land to grow food as well. So one of the project remits is also about looking at how we can better connect these communities with land for food growing and food growing production. The kind of knowledge and heritage of food growing through many different communities is really, really a critical part of what's been happening with Roots into Food Growing, the whole topic of land justice and sharing and passing intergenerational knowledge. One of the definitions that came up as part of the report is trying to understand different sizes of farm. So obviously we have David speaking from the perspective of having several acres of farmland, but being a London-based report, we're dealing with kind of peri-urban growing spaces and the limitations of that, often kind of small individual plots. They might be allotments, might be other found or borrowed spaces that people don't necessarily have ownership of. So they're trying to grow in the short term and potentially grow crops that are linked directly with their heritage for personal use or for sharing amongst communities. Potentially that might come up at markets, but one of the key issues in the research was the lack of access for people of colour to selling and trading, enterprising areas. There's a lot of gatekeeping, and also the general struggle to scale and actually sustain a business as a food grower, which obviously is common to everyone, but given the kind of experiences of racism, are much more challenging to a person of colour trying to break into this area. So that brings us on to the objective of trying to identify land, both within London and more broadly the M25. I know the Soil Association have land that they are offering up to individuals, organisations, and Rickmansworth further out, which is fantastic. But it's still this cycle of temporary access to land, which for people in peri-urban areas doesn't really give them enough time to establish over a longer term a sustainable business and scale up in any way. This is a real vulnerability. And also lots of people have experienced gatekeeping to project spaces, to land, to allotments, both in the peri-urban areas, but also further out in rural areas as well. Something else that the research flagged is the importance of developing enterprise skills for Black growers, understanding the relevant models of trading so that they could actually compete evenly and secure markets and secure sustainable business opportunities. So Roots into Food Growing is currently looking at what does enterprise training look like for collectives to allow them to go from that embryonic startup phase into much bigger in terms of being a startup business. There is a real struggle in trying to do both, grow food and actually develop as an entrepreneur, but I'm sure it will be really interesting to hear David's story of that journey and how he's managed to pivot, navigate that. In terms of the calls for action from the report, the research recommendations that Lion have offered up, I'll share with you here. Importantly, to think of land as a place of activism, not just food growing, but a place for political change, also a place of safety, also a place of healing, which is very important. The need to generate much more research into what individuals and collectives are actually growing across the UK, which I think, pardon me, that I think Hugh might touch upon. Support for growers that I've mentioned in terms of enterprise, business, planning, infrastructure, networks. If growing isn't part of your immediate family background, how do you actually establish yourself and get into the space and find a seat at the table? In terms of Roots into Food Growing and where I'm up to in terms of coordinating the project and what happens next, we are currently looking at the opportunity. So many individuals have approached me who want to be part of the community, grow food, be associated with other people of colour growing food, whether they are part of London networks or collectives or further out in other parts of the UK. There isn't currently a shared platform, but it's something that we are looking to establish if we can generate some further funding. And also the need to kind of connect people in person. Sadly, sign of the times that Oxford was supposed to be live and is now not live. Connecting in person to people who look like you and grow things that you know and you understand is so essential in growing. It's so critical. This doesn't only apply to people just entering the field. It's important to understand that growers who have much more experience, like David and Lutfi, who I was on a panel with this morning at Willowbrook, the outliers, as it were, it's a lonely business being a long-term pioneer in farming if you are a person of colour. You still experience racism, even if you are successful, and potential social isolation. So looking across the curve at what farmers of colour need in terms of peer support and engagement. Another part of my remit has been, in some cases, challenging back to funders. So rather than developing schemes and funders getting funding to do things to Black and minoritized communities, how can we have equitable collaborations and share in terms of the funding, the project development, and be appropriately resourced to do so in terms of time. Everyone's really short of time trying to grow food. We need the resources and the support to be able to do more. Leading to being a better ally for bigger organisations and looking into how you can share your platform, your infrastructure, tools that you might use day to day. For example, talking about developing networks and membership potentially, there are bodies pre-existing already have these mechanisms. How can we share? How can we adopt those tools so that we create a space, but we're not having to reinvent the wheel to do so? And just one thing that I would like to touch on, just jumping around, is the role of local authorities in all of this, in unlocking land, trying to understand better their local users, potential users, local food hidden networks. I've mentioned allotments and trading circles and collectives that are totally under the radar to many people. How can we encourage councils to better connect to collectives and organisations and better support them with longer term access to land to grow crops that are culturally appropriate and support them to, connect to local markets and procurement opportunities? Those are my thoughts, and just in case you didn't get the link to the report, just on your screen now, you can go to the Land in Our Names website as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. Did you want to try and give the video another go? Oh, you're on mute now.
I'll share it in the links. Thanks.
We've got Peter on the call from the tech team who is willing to give it a try at some point. But I'll let that beetle away in the background.
I'm also conscious of time as well and hearing from everyone else. So I'll share the video as a link. That's fine by me. Thank you.
I've already done that. That's all.
Excellent. Cheers.
I'll do it again so it's here now.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline, for that intro and overview. Yeah, so I hope we'll be able to expand upon some of these questions in the Q&A at the end. Do feel free to drop questions in the chat, at any time to everyone to see. Okay, so now we'll move on to Elki from Wolves Lane.
Oh, okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Elki Guillen. I am from Mexico. I've been living in London for a few years. I make this reference because what I do is referent to a plant that comes from Mexico. So I'm gonna guide you through a little bit of the background of Mexico and these plants, Cacti, so you can understand me what was the plant here. So if we go back in time a few thousands of years, these plants are endemic from Mexico. So many cultures back in Mexico, the Toltecs, the Olmecs, the Teotihuacans, Mayans, and the late the Mexicas, which is where the names come from, Mexico. They've used cacti in many ways, mainly in gastronomy. What happened, how these cacti went all over the world is because the Spanish ships, when they got to America, when they start doing the transatlantic travels, they needed to find a way to survive for long periods of time in the Atlantic. And obviously they were running out of food after months in the sea. And they discovered, well, they didn't discover, they realized that the native people in the Americas, they were using cactus in dry land to survive without any other supplies sometimes. So they took, firstly, in the ships, in the lower decks, beds of cactus, then fruit and vegetables, then other layers of cactus to keep the fruit and vegetable in good condition for longer periods of time. And once those supplies were finished, then they start eating the cactus raw. Why raw? Because in order to create fire, you need wood, and there's no woodland in the middle of the Atlantic, unless you start breaking down the ship itself. So this is one of the uses that firstly was taken from the Americas. Secondly, one of the products that was in interest from Europe, from the Americas, it was the grana, which is a pigment that is coming from the an insect, the cochineal, that grows in conjunction with the cactus. So they live together in America. So the gold, the silver, and the grana were taken from America to Europe, and that's another reason why the cactus traveled through the Atlantic. This arrived to the Mediterranean mainly 400, 500 years ago. And because the Mediterranean was the basin which we was a lot of connections by sea, by the ships. So it spread around the Mediterranean in the next 400 years. And then with the English going to colonize other places in the world, they also took the use of cacti to produce the dyeing, the grana. And the cactus ended up in Australia, in New Zealand, in Asia, etc., etc. To the point that Opuntias, which is a species endemic from Mexico, now is everywhere in the world, but is not used as a gastronomy, as I realized when I was traveling first time in Malaga 3 years ago. I came to visit a friend, and I went to the outskirts to have a walk. And while I was walking on the hills, I was telling my friend, that's edible, that's edible, that's edible, that's edible. And she was like, no, 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 no. Yeah, you killed yourself. I'm going to the shops. And I, okay, fine. After 3 or 4 days, I keep going to the hills, back and forwards to cook. So that's when a question came to my mind. How this cactus came to the Mediterranean basin? It's supposed to be in Mexico. And then I started doing my research to the point that I came back to London. I quit my job and I started doing research in full in south of Spain, in Malaga, Andalusia. Then I did a bit of traveling in Italy. Then to realize that there is crops around the Mediterranean, especially in places where there's dry lands in the north of Africa. There's many nations using the Opuntias as a crop or as a construction, as a fiber, biofuel, water management, water treatment, as many things. So I came quite fascinated. Started working with the University of Malaga, with Ecorencia, which they were also doing research on multi-use of plants, not only in cactus. And we started working together. But then COVID arrived, and I was kind of not able to go to Spain. That was like, you guys remember, in February, March, 2 years ago. So everything was done on the land. It was no books. So I was going with the farmers, with people interested, a few talks in schools, in the research center in Malaga and La Noria. So I came back to London empty-handed. And it was until a year ago in August, I was just running around this area. And I saw a few foxes playing around, and I was quite surprised about so many foxes. And they were jumping and playing and doing their stuff. So they took me to what is the outside of the biggest greenhouse. And I thought it was an forgotten factory or something like that. I got an inquiry to knock in the door, email, text, etc. Looking the website, and it was a cactus greenhouse. So I got my attention since I couldn't go to Spain, but there was nobody to open the door. I started throwing stones to the greenhouses to see if somebody was upset and tell me off. Nobody did. So I started jumping the fence for a month every night and trying to get to understand these plants from the perspective of being in London and not in the Mediterranean. And I realized that it was not a heated environment. There was no artificial lights. And I joined Wolf's Lane, first in the kitchen, community kitchen, and then I started looking after the garden. I didn't start this garden. It was a friend of mine. It's a friend of mine, Alistair, which I really thank him for allowing me to be here. But now this become not just a garden, but a research center where the main subject is the Opuntias, which I'm fascinated by the mucilage, which is, I think, the magic of the cactus. This mucilage can be used in many ways. It can be used in gastronomy. It can be used to regulate sugars in the body because it cleans the stomach. It's good for diabetes too. It regulates the sugar, the spike of the insulin. It can be used topically to inflammation, to cure cuts. Later on, part of the research, I realized that in Mexico they use it as the mucilage is used in the mixes for construction, especially when in places where there is a lot of seismic activity. So the bricks become quite flexible and permeable. So it's kind of a Gore-Tex membrane that forms around the brick in the walls. So when it's really hot outside, inside is quite cool, and then at night is an inversion of atmosphere. Water treatment is, there is a process of cleaning water called flocculation, which is basically accumulates the mass, let's say, of soil or dirt accumulates, and it sinks at the bottom of a tank or any container. So this process has been used in Mexico for many years, hundreds of years, I guess, millennia, to purify or clear water, dirty water. And then I found out that there are researchers in universities in US doing more research on this flocculation process. Water treatment as well, especially in dry areas. Where water management, where the water is scarce. So the water, the cactus is given to the animals, obviously without the spines. So the animals stop eating the water that is needed for crops. And also the cactus holds 90% water. So you basically, behind me, in front of me, I'm looking to a water reservoir. It's just a green and it's solid. It's not in the form of water. So what is my my curiosity is that last winter I put some beds around around the space. And in the 14th of January, I remember it was a snow, it was -1, -2. And that day I was taking pictures and I saw that the cactus started growing. So I read that cactus, when it's cold, is damp, or is a lot of, the daylight is short, the cactus go to sleep. But in this case, they didn't. So I was like quite fascinated that in an environment like London and like this, which is not heated, there's no artificial lights. Well, there is one lamp over there, but clearly it's not for this purpose. the cactus can grow, and we can make a crop. So there's a nursery going on that side, which is like a prototype to see how far I can take a cactus in a non-dry area to become a crop. So I went back to Spain with my friend, there's a researcher, and there was a space full of cactus of many genera and species. So, and again, he didn't knew that everything was edible, and I just went and just picking cactus with a knife and start cutting and eating raw, like I have here now. This is one of the pads that we have here, and this is just a fraction, and I just took out the spines and I started eating it. I mean, the flavor is like asparagus, meat okra in raw. Nothing will happen to me. I'm not gonna die, don't worry. The only thing that's gonna happen to me now is that my stomach is gonna get clean, and I'm gonna have more chlorophyll in my body and vitamins. That's what the sailors crossing the Atlantis were looking for to avoid scurvy in a transatlantic travel. So then I start growing more Opuntias of different types, and to see if they could survive the next winter, which is this one. And so far, I have growth. So that's what is my interest, see how far we can go, pushing the boundaries on the temperature, the daylight, etc., and to keep growing cactus. So far here in the community kitchen, sometimes when in summer when I have extra pots, I just give it to the kitchen to cook, and people don't know that there's cactus, and they quite like it, to be honest. So this is Opuntia. So how, I'm just going to explain quickly, I have 5 minutes. The Opuntias are the padded cactus. There are ones that are elongations, and the mammillaria, which are circular. So the Opuntias, where the spines coming out, is called the eye rolls. And these eye rolls are where the cactus take moisture from the atmosphere rather than in the roots. So in case one of these paths goes into the floor, these become the root system. So if we cut one path, this will close and this become another plant. So let's say this path just came from one cactus, goes in the floor, and is another plant. So it's very easy to propagate, but obviously I need the sunlight. So I'm trying to get the maximum use of sunlight during summer, summer days, but clearly in winter also this plant can grow in a slow pace, but it can grow, and we can use it in gastronomy, as I've been using here at Wolves Lane. So mainly this is what I'm doing with the research and with this garden. Also, community gets involved here. People come here to play music, to learn about cactus, to do sketching, to just meditate sometimes, to ask me questions about their cactus at home. But mainly, I want this space to be a research center for a crop in the future, because clearly this has been the hottest New Year's, I think, in history, or ever recorded, since I saw in BBC News 2-3 days ago. So clearly we're going to that curve. So we need to look into alternatives for the future. So yeah, so I think that's it. If any questions now. I don't know if we have 3 minutes or we can jump into David, I think.
We've got a couple of minutes. Thank you, Elki. Yeah.
Yeah.
So questions come through from Sarah Allen Jones. She says, this is fascinating. Elki, do you think this would work in tunnels as opposed to glass greenhouses like you've got at Wolves Lane?
Yeah, it can work in tunnels. I think it can work outside. I have a few cactus outside, and it's been quite cold. It's been damp and it's dark, and they are perfectly fine. I mean, not all cactus, obviously, but I'm using Opuntia cantarae that it happens that is from Argentina, and the climate in the places where this is endemic is very similar to the climate here in the UK. So it's like antipodes, right? So it's at the same heights and of close to the north or the south. That's why this is it can be a solution here. But it can be I mean, I wouldn't recommend in a plastic environment, but obviously, yeah, it can be done, I guess. And you don't need water.
Now, I know you've hurt your leg, but somebody's asked, how do you deal with the prickles on them? And I don't suppose you're able to bring the one that you brought. Okay, you've got some gloves
look,
there.
I have my leather gloves, obviously, but there are different types of Opuntias. There's about 5,000 types of species of cactus in the world. Most of them are endemic of the Americas. And the biggest concentration of cactus endemic is from Mexico, where I'm from. So in a hostile environment, many cactus grow big spines. But in places where the environment is not that hostile and animals don't look as a water resource in cactus, the cactus doesn't have spines. So we're looking into a crop spineless. So by the time we have to do the harvest, we don't have to deal with spines.
So just to confirm, Elki, you've not processed what you're holding there at all. That's exactly how it grows.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, protruding.
Yeah. But I wouldn't do this with this one, obviously. That's why.
Yeah. Marion Gaze is asking for the name of the hardy one, please. Maybe you can pop that in the chat when you're.
Yeah, Opuntias. It's the family of the Opuntias. Opuntias.
Sorry, Elki, I missed that last bit.
So yeah, there's about 300 in the genus of Opuntias, 150 endemic from Mexico. The rest from the Americas.
Okay, Elki, thank you so much for your time and coming from the tunnel there. I know it's taken you a while to set up, so really appreciate that. And we'll hopefully have some. I know there's a few more questions come in for you. Elki has set up his own discussion board on the Hoover website. So following on from this session, there'll be chances to keep in touch with Elki there. And I know you run interesting events at Wolves Lane from time to time. I saw one about a cacti tasting and a storytelling, I think back in October, or I couldn't make it, unfortunately. But so if you're able to share some of your contacts or something so people can know about those things if they're in the area. But thank you very much. David, we're going to move on to you now, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today. I hope you can all hear me because I've been apologizing since morning. I'm recovering from COVID and my voice is really bad. And just in case you see me sweating, please, I'm not high on anything. I'm just, you know what it is with COVID. Yeah, just like the previous speaker, I also came to the UK when I was 26 years old. And when I arrived in the UK, I thought I would have the food that I was eating when I was back in my country. I do come from Zimbabwe. And when I came here, I was looking forward to eating what we call white maize. It just wasn't known in the country. No one knew what white maize was in this country. And but this is something that I grew up eating in Zimbabwe, back in Zimbabwe. And apparently, the irony is that maize originates from South America, from Mexico, where the previous speaker actually comes from. Actually, there are some similarities there with the two of us, how we ended up in this country, but from a different background, where we grew up eating something, but it wasn't available. And when it comes to food and human migration, I always imagine what it is for someone who grew up eating fish and chips in the UK, and then they end up in, let's say, Australia, Africa, or somewhere where they've never heard of chips, or of chips rather. So basically, they grew up with having potatoes, growing potatoes, eating potatoes, but all of a sudden there were no potatoes. I would assume maybe at first they would maybe ask people who are coming back from their home country to bring some potatoes, and when they are finished, they start craving for potatoes again. The potatoes are not there, and it's just maybe a cycle. But maybe someone after some time will think, well, let me try to grow potatoes in this environment. I'm probably not going to continue asking some people to bring potatoes to me. Let me try to grow potatoes here. And maybe the first time you try to grow the potatoes, it doesn't work. You don't get a crop. Maybe the climate or the soil is not good enough. But then, possibly after some time, after trials for months or years, you start getting potatoes, and it's once again, you start enjoying your fish and chips. This was the same thing with me, and it's the same thing with most people who come from other continents, who come to the UK, and all of a sudden, food that they grew up eating is just not available. It's for one reason or the other, it's not available. And the crop that I grew up eating, that's white maize, it's got a shelf life of 1 day. So you might think, oh wow, why didn't you import it? Because if you, just like all the other fruits and veg that are eaten in the country, lots of them are imported from other countries. Why didn't you import your white maize? But white maize has got a shelf life of just 1 day. By the time you get it into the country, it will be just a lump of starch. So I couldn't really successfully import white maize. So I had to think of how I could grow the white maize myself. It was an extremely difficult journey because one, I didn't have the land. Two, I didn't even know if I could grow white maize in the country. Actually, what I did was, when I thought, let me start growing white maize in the country, I called one gentleman who was the president of the Maize Association in this country, and I asked him if there was someone who was growing white maize in the country. He said, white maize is a tropical crop. You can't grow it in the country, and that's it. I tried to ask him a few more questions. Then he just said in the end, no, you're wasting your time and you're wasting my time, hang up on me. And that was it. So I remained sitting there thinking, so yeah, my dream is dead. I am not gonna eat white maize in the country. The guy whom I thought could help me, he's got all the knowledge of how to grow maize in the country. And he just told me, I can't do it. So after a while, I thought, no, I just want to prove this guy wrong. Let me try to grow white maize. And so there are two reasons why I started growing white maize. I wanted to eat white maize because I grew up eating it. And then on the other hand, I wanted to prove someone wrong that I could actually grow the white maize in this country. So I started experimenting, just like the previous speaker also, to experiment growing cactus and to see if we can actually grow it in this country. That was my long journey of trying to grow white maize in the country. The other problem I had, which is what most people who are not born in this country or who don't have an agricultural background or who don't have the land would face, is where do you get the land from? You might have an idea, but how am I going to get the land? I mean, getting land in this country is difficult, whether you're black or white, but then it can be worse if you are not, if you are black, of course. And then I remember the first days I would drive around the countryside, knocking on some farmers' doors, asking if they had land to grow maize. And they just look at me and nobody believed me. They just thought maybe I was up to no good. And I got nowhere. And then one day I thought, let me publish, let me advertise in a local newspaper that I was looking for land to grow maize. The only person who got in touch with me was a journalist who was working for a national newspaper, who was also intrigued because then he couldn't put one and one together. Why would a person called David Mwanaka why would you be looking for land to grow maize? He didn't know what white maize was. Two, the name itself didn't make sense that I wanted to be a farmer in this country. So he called me for an interview, and of course, to me, anything that would make me get a piece of land somewhere was okay. So I accepted, and I did an interview in the Guardian newspaper, and from there, I had a few offers right around the country, and eventually I ended up on a piece of land in Enfield, North London. For a start, it was just 10 acres, I think so. Yeah, it was 10 acres, but now we're up to more than 150 acres of land growing all exotic different vegetables. But we started with just 10 acres. So I was so happy when I got the 10 acres, and to me it was, yeah, my dream has come to pass. And then what I actually didn't anticipate was the fact that after growing the maize, I need to sell it. So when the crop was ready to harvest, I put some in the back of I used to drive a Ford Mondeo. I drove to Tottenham, and there was a group of, actually I drove to a church, and there were some blacks there at that church. And then I opened the boot of my car, and I thought people were going to rush and buy my maize because this was something new. No one was interested in buying the maize. And for some reason, they thought maybe, actually, because they'd never seen it, so they just didn't believe me that I was selling white maize. And I didn't even sell one cob. So I left that place. So I was really heartbroken because now I couldn't sell the maize. I had got the crop, but I can't sell it. And then I had to think of other ways and means of selling my maize. And eventually, that's how I started selling maize in the UK. And apart from just the maize, I also came to a point of thinking, well, there are lots of things that you can grow. Take an example, your background is from, let's say, the Caribbean, or Jamaica, or whichever country. You came into the country, and there are lots of things that you grew up eating in Jamaica that can actually grow in this country. Or if you come from India, whatever country it is, there are lots of crops that you grew up eating there, but they're not either available, or if they're available, by the time they're sold in this country, they're not as fresh as they would have been, or they're back home. So it's from that background that I started doing a lot of research into other crops that can be locally grown in the UK. An example of the crops that I grow as well is this one. I hope you all can see it, and what it probably resembles a COVID-19, what you've seen as COVID-19, but it's not. This is what we call jelly melon, or African horn melon. It's not very kind if you don't touch it properly. It's got thorns. It's more like the cactus the previous speaker grows. So after having grown my white maize, just like I'm saying, I thought of growing other crops as well, in line with my theme, that is growing crops that are not grown in the UK. I started growing crops like white sweet corn. White sweet corn is not known in this country either. It is a crop that's grown mostly in America and Canada, in Mexico, but I wanted to grow it in the UK. That's what I started experimenting growing, and that's what I started selling in shops like Sainsbury's and Harrods. So our backgrounds as people who are not born in this country might make us think you can't do anything that you used to do back home, because you haven't got the experience, one, and two, you haven't got the land, and you simply don't know how to go about getting help. You might have to start the same way I started, or the same way the gentleman who was talking about, the previous speaker was talking about cactus did. It's a matter of experimenting, doing trials on your own. In my case, when I started growing white maize, I started in my back garden, and I remember my neighbor's kids used to kick their ball into my backyard, and the crop was so tall, something like 2 meters or 3 meters high. And they used to say, "Oh, please, can you allow us to go into a back garden and pick our ball?" They used to say it's a forest. Can you allow us to go into a forest and pick our ball? I said, "Oh, don't worry, go in there. There are no lions, there are no cheetahs or elephants. You go in there and come back safely." And that's how it was. So it took me something like 5 years of experimenting to grow white maize in the country. And part of the problem that I had was which varieties to grow, where can you grow it, and you can actually grow so many varieties of white maize in the country, but which one is the best and which soil is the best? So it takes a long time, and you haven't got a book to read. You have nothing to help you to say, "Oh, this is what I'm going to rely on," or I can phone someone and ask them. Anyone who could try, whom we approach, ask them about white maize, they tell, "No, I've never grown white maize anywhere in the world, and I'm not interested in knowing how to grow white maize." That's the reception that that's the answers that I always got from farmers. So if you are from another background that is not from the farming background in this country, I think don't give up on your idea because no one has done it or it's difficult. Of course, if you want to start any business, it's difficult. And when I started, I didn't even start as if I wanted to. I didn't start it as a business. To me, I just wanted to eat white maize, period. I wasn't interested in selling it to anyone else. But then when I had the crop, that's when I discovered that, well, I wasn't the only person missing eating white maize in the country. There were lots of people actually from South America, from Asia, from Africa, of course, who were interested in eating maize. So I wasn't the only one. So in some cases, we started a business because we just want to solve our problems. And in solving our own problems, end up solving the problems of lots of other people. So that's really how I started. I didn't start growing maize because I wanted money. I started growing maize because I just wanted to eat white maize. And my wife also, she didn't think I was serious actually when I started. And at that time I used to work as a traffic warden. So one of the reasons also why I started growing white maize, I thought, yeah, I'm working as a traffic warden here. If I go into farming, I don't lose anything. There's nothing worse than working as a traffic warden. So I'm okay trying something new. And I started doing that and started farming white maize. And just like I said again, right now we are growing more than 150 acres, and I think next year we should be. I think, well, sometime this year we should be going up to 200 or 300 acres of white maize and other exotic vegetables. So thank you very much. I did manage to pull through, although I know my my voice is just it's no good. Thank you very much, though.
Thank you, David. Oh, we could hear you loud and clear. That was great to hear about your journey. I wondered in terms of the white maize and what you've noticed about the soil health, how you. But I think you just at the very end there mentioned that you're also growing a lot of other vegetables as well as white maize. So are you sort of rotating? How do you look after your soil health when you've got a single crop that you're particularly trying to champion?
Yes, I do rotate, of course. I do crop rotation. I do grow, pumpkins. I do grow some vegetables like kale, mustard greens. But then on the other hand, maize or sweet corn in particular is very good. It's one of those crops that you can grow on the same piece of land for well over 5 years. That's the good thing about maize. You can actually grow up to 10 years without so much troubles, until and only that time when you start having animals, knowing that you grow the same crop on the same piece of land. I mean, you can have problems with birds like crows, because they know that year one you've been growing maize, year two is the same thing. And from time, after a while, they will start learning that every year in spring, there's a crop of maize that's grown on that piece of land. And you get to a point where you've got a flock of crows coming down on your field and end up with almost nothing. Actually, it happened one year when you had 10 acres of land, all of the whole 10 acres was destroyed by crows, because they'd come to know that there's a crop of maize grown on this piece of land year after year.
How do you combat against the crows, or do you just have to grow enough to take the losses?
Well, after a while, you would have to leave. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. You got to leave that piece of land, because even if you were to use scarecrows, crows only take a few days, 2-3 days, to realize that it's a scarecrow, and the next time you come there, they're sitting right on top of the scarecrow. And so, and then in some cases, the fields might be next to houses, so you can't put some bangers that do scare birds away from the field. So you would have, that's when you have to leave the field and grow something else.
So David, a few questions just from the chat. Obi Pearl is asking, what key resources do you need for heritage crops from the Caribbean, etc.? Also, could you share the name of that fruit again? Was it a jelly melon?
It's horn melon, Horn.
Horn melon.
Well, it's in the family of cucumbers, but when it's ripened, like when it ripens like this, some say the taste is in between pineapple and a banana. But in the early stages, it's green like a cucumber, and it tastes more like a cucumber.
Okay. And in terms of key resources.
Oh yeah, key resource. Well, there's one thing that you really got to understand when you're growing exotic vegetables. I specialize in growing exotic vegetables, because it's pointless for me to grow wheat or the crops that are grown by the farmers who are around me. I would say the most important thing is you got to do your own research, because I can't even tell you, go to this part of the country and grow whatever crop that you want to grow, that you grow up eating in or growing in Jamaica. It's just not possible. You've got to do your own experiment. Just like me and the previous speaker, it's a question of trials, because it's something new. So you would have to know what you want to grow, and the soil that's good for that crop, as well as the temperature. Temperature is the most important thing than even the soil, because you're not gonna perform a miracle of having an Indian summer like they say if you live in Scotland. So it also depends which part of the country you are in. If you're in Scotland, the weather in Scotland is completely different from the weather down here in London. So it's also where you want to start the experiment. So I can't give you a definite answer that this is what you need to do, but it's something that you would have to research. Unfortunately, you might not find that information in any book. You would have, it's hands-on research.
It's the importance of having these networks, vibrant networks of people being able to communicate things, and often in person. Pauline has asked, do you sell, share, save seed? And have you managed to refine the maize crop you grow?
Well, unfortunately, I don't sell seeds. I actually do employ a certified breeder to grow the varieties that I breed myself, because it's difficult to just grow any variety of white maize in the country. You can successfully grow it, but not to, you might not get the results that you really intend to get.
So I think building on that, we've got Anton Rosenfeld asking, do you save seeds from your special varieties of white maize, or do you get them from Zimbabwe every year? I realize that maize.
I don't get them from Zimbabwe, neither do I save. I can save the seeds, but then the quality won't be as good as if I were to get someone to breed them for me. Yeah, so that's why I said I got to, I do employ someone to breed the seed for me.
Yeah. And Sarah Allen Jones is asking, do you ever do farm visits?
Yes, I do. Yeah, but not at the moment. It's only in summer.
Okay, in the summer. And how might people find out about these visits, opportunities?
Well, you can call me. I don't know if you got my details somewhere.
We've been putting a link to your website. Is the best place info@mwanakafreshfarmfoods.com?
That's it, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely call me, yeah.
So
Or
please
send
do
me
get in. Sorry.
Yeah,
Please.
I'm saying you can call me or send me an email. Yeah, that's whichever.
Great. Yeah, so please do get in touch with David if you're interested in visiting. So that's more in terms of the summer. And a final question for you, David, here is from Jennifer McGilvery asking, is this a different variety to our corn on the cob? And how do you eat it? I think she means how do you eat white maize?
Yes, it's different from corn on the cob, but then you eat it the same way as corn on the cob. White maize or yellow maize is not as sweet as sweet corn. Sweet corn, just as it says, it's sweet, but maize varieties are not sweet. They are chewy. They're chewy and a lot harder than the sweet corn. But people from other societies, mostly from Southern America, Africa, and Asia, they actually know that you can boil or roast maize, whether it's yellow or white. You can actually eat both of them. Unfortunately, people in this country just associate when they're driving around the countryside. They assume the assumption is it's either sweet corn or maize, or you can't actually even tell the difference between the two. The plant itself might look exactly the same, but the fruit itself, that's the cob, is actually different. And there are so many varieties of maize. I don't even know how many, well, possibly into thousands. And at the same time, we still have got so many 100 varieties of sweet corn. And when it comes to maize, you've got yellow maize, you've got white, purple, pink, blue. And when it comes to sweet corn, you've got yellow, white, and you've got another one which is sort of in between yellow and white by color. So there's so many varieties. You just need to know which one you want to grow.
Thank you, David. I'm going to open it up to Pauline and Elki as well now. Elki, I think you've answered the question about Genevieve was asking, I may have missed, but have you been growing those with edible fruits too? And any success with fruiting?
Yes, we have Opuntia canzarae is actually is fruiting now.
in your very growing space.
Yeah, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 8. I don't know.
Are you able to reverse your camera? Because you showed me earlier what's behind the camera, which is just as fascinating.
Let me see. Yeah, so that's the corridor. So I can go in there. That's Opuntias. There's more Opuntias over there in the back. I can actually show you. Yeah. So these are all Opuntias. Basically, I think my theory is, I haven't tried it, but all cactus are edible. Yeah. So it's just that I don't want to sacrifice these ones because it takes too long to grow. But I'm pretty sure big quantity of all the cactus available can be edible, as I prove with every single Opuntia that I've found myself. I've eaten them all. I'm still here.
Yeah, fantastic. So just as a little thought experiment, if you were to cut everything down to the ground here or to the pot, how long would it take to grow back to that much again? What sort of time frame are we looking at for the growth of cacti? Are they all different?
They're all different. For example, I have this one. I caught this one from this part similar to this one. So even if I bite this one, I can put it on the floor in the soil, and it can grow in 2-3 months during the summer. So the bigger the plant, obviously, it will have more branches. But yeah, this this is a fascinating thing. If this goes in the floor, it will start rooting from the eye rolls, which is a complete different system than what we know in other plants. Because the eye rolls where the spine's coming out, that's where the roots start coming out.
Fascinating.
So, yeah, fascinating, yeah.
We had a question, Penelope Kenny is asking, can you eat and prepare these like nopalies?
Yeah, that's what it is. Nopali is a word in Nahuatl, but in taxonomy is Opuntia. Yeah. So I have another example here. Let me just get my glove because these ones are quite spiky. I'm gonna get close to the camera. So this is a pad, you see. This fell off, and the roots is coming from the arrows, which are the spikes. Yeah. So I haven't done nothing with this. It just start growing, start rooting, and soon it's gonna start another pads coming out from here.
So Pauline, you had a question for David, please.
Yeah, I wondered how David went from experimentation to trading and getting into supermarkets. How long did it take, and what was the process?
Right. Yeah, you might actually think it's impossible or very difficult to get into the supermarkets or to have your products on the supermarket shelves. But basically what they want is something new. They always want something that's appealing to their customers out there. Something that a customer will walk in and say, oh, well, maybe I haven't seen that thing. And to them, it's all about money, really. For the supermarkets, as long as they can make money out of your product, they are willing to take it. But then the biggest challenge is, how do you actually get in touch with them? It's so difficult, I know, even up to now. You can't go directly to Tesco and say, oh, I want to sell this product to you. Can you take it? They would have to put you, you have to go through their middlemen who have the time, well, most of the time they won't return calls if you call them. They want you to just send an email or leave a message, and they'll never ever get back to you. So that's probably the biggest problem of how to get to the companies that do supply the supermarkets with fresh produce. That time it wasn't that very difficult, but I know at the moment it is difficult because they simply don't get back to you, even if they're even if you've got a new product. But it's just a question of trying and trying and trying. I know someone who said, well, you must have employed someone who is so good in trying to sell your product. But then the truth of the matter is, I just didn't. I just picked up the phone and tried and called. So try. If you tried last time, try again. Hopefully it's gonna work this time.
How long did it take? Was it years, months?
No, that time it didn't take days, to be honest with you. I think it was just a matter of 1 or 2 calls, and then someone got back to me. But now I know it's difficult, but I'm not saying it's difficult, you can't do it, but it's a lot more difficult than it was then. And
what was the size of your, I don't know if you remember, what was the size of your first order compared to how much you're growing now? You remember? Well, it wasn't a lot. I didn't sell a lot. But the fact that I didn't manage to me, the achievement was the fact that I did manage to sell rather than how much I did sell. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Pauline.
I think that twins with a question from Rebecca Swin about scaling up and finding markets. I think you've pretty much just been speaking about that. But were you able to scale up? You know, once you'd got your first orders secured, then opportunities open for you to scale up to a more robust commercial scale?
Yeah, I didn't really go all that way. I mean, actually, if I were to tell you one thing, when I started supplying Sainsbury's, my one of the farmers next to me said, "Oh no, you're selling to supermarkets here. You come back to me a few years later and tell me what the story is." they basically want everything from you for nothing. That's one of the things with the supermarkets. They prefer they don't pay you, and I don't think they really have changed. So I actually at some point I had to stop selling to the supermarkets and then concentrate on my own markets. And I might consider going back to the supermarkets. I probably would, but for the past few years, I just actually stopped.
Okay, that's interesting. So, have I understood that correctly? You've stopped now supplying to supermarkets.
Yes, I stopped. Yeah.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, yeah, how it was working with supermarkets, and how did you feel? What's your connection with the kind of local community when you has it started to improve? What sort of relationships are you finding you're building now that you're not selling into supermarkets? Have you seen a big change?
At the moment, I'm just, well, everything that I'm growing, I've managed to sell through my own channels without having to go to the supermarket. So unless and only I get a lot more land than I have, that I would have to consider going back to the supermarkets. Yeah, the problem with the supermarkets in this country, like I said before, is that they are not so willing to, they're not really willing to help farmers. They are more than willing to make money themselves rather than to make sure that the farmers at the end of the day get something. If you were to look at the dairy farmers in this country, I don't remember a time when they ever said they're okay with the prices that they were getting from the supermarket. That's why the advice that I got from my neighboring farmer is that, well, you supply them and you come back to me a few years later and you tell me a different story. One day you are happy, you're supplying a big supermarket, and then the next day you're telling me that, oh, you're not getting enough for what you've supplied. An example is, right, my very last supply to one of the supermarkets is that the very last supply that we sent to one of the supermarkets, we were not told that they were going to sell our produce at a reduced price. So basically, they just decided, oh, we'll sell one for the two for the price of two for the price of one. So they do it. The general public, they're so happy that you're getting this product cheap, but what the general public is not aware of is that it's at the expense of the farmer. The farmer is actually not even told that you're going to reduce the price of your produce. They just decide, that's what I'm going to do, and they start selling your produce at half the price. And when you get the check, that's when you realize, wow, what was the point? I didn't even have to send I actually didn't have to send my last shipment to them. If I had known they were going to sell it at half a price, because I end up actually owing them. So that's one of those things that is not very one of those things that I said, the supermarkets haven't been very supportive of the local producers.
Thank you, David. There's a question here from Jack Thompson. I'm interested to know the line between climatic limitations and the limitations of our own imagination. What's the process of identifying plants that can grow here? Now, I think that's probably open to, actually, Elki, I might just pose this to you and Pauline, obviously, chip in, anybody chip in. But because you've got some interesting ideas about growing cacti in extreme conditions in Scotland, which kind of connects with this idea of imagination. You're pushing the cacti to its limits there.
Yeah, so I have a friend in Glasgow. He's a climber, and we often go to do some Monroes, as they call it over there in Scotland. So he's going back to 14th of January last year, where this place was covered in snow. It was like going into a spaceship, very weird experience. And the cactus was actually sprouting. It was growth. And then while I was in Scotland, I said to myself, why not here? So I give that idea to my friend, which is a walker, a climber. And he says, well, I can ask my climber friends if they want to take 2 or 3 cactus somewhere in a spot, and they will monitor every once a month to see if they're still alive for 6 months or 1 year, and come back to you in London with the results. So in a way is to put them in a stress to see how far they can go. But I'm clearly here. We're freezing. We are at 3 degrees now. 3 degrees, and you know, there's nothing dying over here. So clearly they can get a few frosts on a continuous time. So I guess that's the answer, maybe.
Great, thank you. And just over a broad question here to kind of draw it to a close, but it's a big question. And maybe, Pauline, I think you've alluded to quite a few things that we could be doing, actually. But what are the type of things that organisations such as Soil Association can do to really help to really help as a platform for growers to get culturally appropriate produce to the market? And does the term organic kind of resonate with anything you're trying to achieve? Does organic enter into your discussions, or is it? I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on that.
The organic part, it's not certified in terms of Soil Association accreditation and costs, but most of the projects that I have experienced are growing without chemicals, specifically because of the cultural importance of that, and growing in a way that is in harmony with the soil, moon planting, harvesting, etc. So taking care of the system, I think that's quite important. But there is the issue of gatekeeping at markets. If you're going to a farmer's market and something isn't stamped with that organic Soil Association label, you can't trade it as such. And that affects in turn the pricing that you can receive for your items. So kind of exploring that, I think, would be a good thing to do, and work out maybe some sort of tiered system or alternative approaches to what is organic. Is it around kind of communications or language? Not sure. The other conversation that I can see in the chat is coming up, and also, sorry, I've seen that Josina's mentioned about the cost of accreditation for Soil Association. The other thing that you've trailed and that we've started to talk about is the potential of some sort of lab to work out if and how we can grow culturally appropriate crops and what that might look like in terms of some sort of structured support mechanism. I think looking at that after this, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and working with a group of people who do have ideas about what could be grown, such as the speakers here, Elki, David, the other, Cocoa Collective, other Black-led growing groups, to shape that and to set up some micro experiments could be exciting. But it does depend on what the equity is in such a scheme, I think. Really critical. It's got to benefit both sides, right?
Thank you, Pauline. Yeah, and so Josina was making a comment about some BPOC growers in the report told us we couldn't afford Soil Association certification, and that is definitely something we are looking into. How do we, yeah, as you mentioned, how do we move towards a tiered system to make it more accessible? Because it's an identified barrier that we need to get over. We are there. I think we need to finish on time. So I think that just leaves thank yous, really. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, David, and thank you, Elki, for sharing your insights and knowledge from all these different areas. It's been really interesting. There is a Cacti specific Hoover group, and one on culturally appropriate field labs as well. So those links have been in the conversation, but you'll find them in the discussion topics. And thank you, Lucy, in the background for helping out in the session. And hopefully we'll carry on this conversation and collaboration. So bye, everybody. Thank you.